Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the SPM Roadmap. Before we get started, I'd like to talk about interpretation. So on screen are instructions for selecting the language you would like to hear this webinar in today, English or Spanish. We have both transcription and interpretation options. So if you would like an English transcription, in your meeting controls, click Live Transcript and click Show Subtitle. There will be an English channel under the interpretation, and once that feature pops up, you can click on the globe and select English. I'll hand it over to our interpreters.
Thank you. Para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación, por favor desplácese a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, que es el globo terráqueo, y seleccione su idioma. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom en celular o tableta, presione los puntos suspensivos, luego Interpretation y luego el idioma. Gracias.
Good morning and welcome. If you have any questions on joining the interpretation channel, please reach out on the chat in Zoom for technical assistance. We're glad to have you here today to join our informational webinar to provide a deeper dive into the recommendations included in the Sustainable Pest Management Roadmap and to hear perspective on the development of the roadmap from members of the Sustainable Pest Management Work Group. This is our agricultural focused webinar. We had two webinars on Tuesday that were focused on the urban recommendations, and we'll also have another webinar this evening at 5:30 that will cover the same materials in today's presentation. The webinars will be posted on our website for you to look at after the fact as well. We hope that the content and information shared today can be used to inform comments from all of you and the public on the prioritization and implementation of the recommendations included in the roadmap. Our public comment is running through March 13th at 5 p.m. And you can send comments either to the email alternatives@cdpr.ca.gov or to the address listed on the screen. We really invite you to share your thoughts, concerns, recommendations, suggestions, or other comments with the department as DPR and our partners consider next steps in the implementation of the recommendations in the roadmap, and as we work together to accelerate a statewide transition to more sustainable pest management across the state. We hope to have some time for questions at the end, but as I noted, this is an informational webinar, so we may not be able to get to all of them. But to ask a question, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom to enter questions. And want to note that there will be continued opportunities for public engagement in the coming months. And so with that, would like to introduce and welcome the Director of the Department of Pesticide Regulation, Julie Henderson, who will be leading our webinar today. Julie.
Thank you very much, Karen, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're very excited to provide this overview of the roadmap and to have members of the Sustainable Pest Management Work Group with us here today. I'd just like to start by talking about why we're focusing on this acceleration of transitioning to sustainable pest management in California. And I'd like to begin by recognizing the real progress that has been made in past decades by so many to transition to safer and more sustainable pest management practices. It's also important to recognize that California has a strict regulatory system and a robust risk assessment process that protects people and the environment as part of our pest management across the state. But there are still chemical tools in use that can cause harm to people and the environment. And so we're working to accelerate an expanded statewide adoption of sustainable pest management to reduce health and environmental risks associated with pesticide use particularly in areas disproportionately burdened by multiple sources of pollution. And now I'd like to introduce Claire Mendelson, Deputy Secretary for Public Policy, to give us a perspective from Cal EPA.
Thank you, Julie, and good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here with you this morning. On behalf of my boss, Secretary Yana Garcia, and myself, thank you for your interest and time here today to learn more about this exciting and important journey we are embarking on here in California. As Julie mentioned, and I'll emphasize, it's important to acknowledge that we have made progress in identifying safer methods to solve pest problems in our crops, cities, parks and forests, homes, and businesses, but we have not done it on a system-wide scale. Also worth repeating is that the evolving science about risks and impacts from certain pesticide uses on our health and our environment, which too commonly impacts communities already overburdened by other environmental hazards, point to the importance of accelerating the system-wide shift. So not only is this transition to sustainable pest management necessary to build a healthy and safe California for all, but it is an inspiring opportunity for California to once again lead in paving a sustainable path for our future. The diverse collaboration that went into the making of this roadmap shows that this path is possible to everyone's benefit. Benefits to ecosystem resilience, agricultural sustainability, community well-being, and economic vitality. We don't expect this to be easy, but with a good dose of creativity and innovation, and importantly, ongoing partnership, we can continue the good momentum of the roadmap work group to carry their vision into reality. Thank you for participating in this webinar and for being with us on this exciting journey. Back over to you, Julie.
Thanks very much, Claire. And now I'd like to introduce Christy Birdsong, Undersecretary at the California Department of Food and Agriculture.
Thanks, Julie. I want to start by thanking you and your team, Karen, and our partners at Cal EPA, Claire and Amy, for all of your leadership and your partnership on this adventure. And I'd also like to acknowledge the many hours that this incredibly diverse group of people dedicated to crafting this roadmap. It is something to be proud of. It's noteworthy and also encouraging, I think, that so many different perspectives, including multiple agricultural perspectives, were genuinely listened to and taken into account. And this is why the document is almost 100 pages. But this is really just the starting point, and it will take a great deal of commitment and investment to reach our goals. Investments in new technologies and practices and alternatives that have to work for both conventional and organic agriculture at all scales. Also has to work in urban settings where the use of pesticides is sometimes overlooked. While CDFA's pest management programs will surely benefit from advances in SPM, in many ways, we already lead in this space, since integrated pest management, a building block for SPM, is an approach that CDFA has followed for decades. From biocontrol in both our citrus and Pierce's disease programs to our vital work with USDA and our county partners in pest prevention and detection, we hope to continue to lead in this space. Because after all, we do have a $51 billion agricultural industry to protect. That's important not just for our state's economy, for the jobs it provides, for the communities it supports, but for the healthy, safe, and delicious food that we provide to the rest of the country and the world. So thank you again to all of you who are tuning in to learn more about the SPM, and I encourage you to stay involved and help us as we advance SPM. Thanks again. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you so much, Christy, and really huge thanks to you and the members of the CDFA team for your participation on the work group, and to Secretary Ross's support. Really appreciate it. So now I'd like to start with a few words about the Sustainable Pest Management Work Group and really echo Christie's thanks to this incredible team of 33 people, 25 who were dedicated to agriculture and 8 who were focused on the urban space. But they spent nearly 21 months building this roadmap, and it was an incredible achievement. We were really intentional about having real diversity and a diverse set of perspectives as part of the work group to really come up with a roadmap that can transition us to sustainable pest management in both agricultural and urban settings. We recognize, though, that as diverse as the work group is, there are many perspectives across California. And so we're very excited to enter into this phase of sharing the roadmap to bring in a broader public perspective on the roadmap's implementation. And we're really looking for that diverse set of perspectives and collaboration that were a key part of developing the roadmap to pursuing its implementation. And so are very excited to have all of you here today to begin that process. So I'll start with just giving a quick overview of our agenda for today. We'll start with an overview of the roadmap's development, some key definitions, our North Star and 2050 goals. We'll also talk about the keystone actions that will advance sustainable pest management in both agricultural and urban contexts. And then we'll do a deeper dive into advancing sustainable pest management into those areas that both apply in both urban and agricultural settings, as well as those that are really focused on the agricultural space. And then finally, we'll share perspectives of a number of members of the work group who are here with us today. So what is sustainable pest management? As Christy noted, this work really builds on a very strong foundation of integrated pest management that's been practiced for decades across the state. And one of the things that the work group really looked at in thinking about sustainable pest management is how do we overcome the hurdles that have been in place to broader adoption, and what may be missing from that integrated pest management definition. And so what we came up with for sustainable pest management is really focusing on a holistic whole system approach that builds on integrated pest management, but adds these 3 sustainability pillars of health and equity, environmental protection, and economic vitality. So the work group began its work by developing a North Star of really what is the future state that we want to get to by a system-wide adoption of sustainable pest management. And that is pest management practices that promote human health and safety, ecosystem resilience, agricultural sustainability, community well-being, and economic vitality. And the implementation of these approaches will help steward the state's natural and cultural resources and enable healthy lives for all Californians and an abundant, healthy food supply for future generations. So the work group also developed 2 really overarching goals to be achieved by 2050. The first is that California will have eliminated the use of priority pesticides by transitioning to sustainable pest management practices. And one of the things to note here that I'll get into as we move through the webinar is really how critical having alternatives to those priority pesticides is to achieving this goal. And then the second goal is that sustainable pest management will have been adopted as the de facto pest management approach across California. These 2050 targets and that 2050 date really reflects a recognition that system-wide change takes time and that we need alternatives and we need them to be developed and understood and knowledge shared to be able to adopt alternatives to priority pesticides. And those alternatives take many forms and need support and collaboration as part of this transition. A priority outcome of these 2050 goals is the elimination of adverse human health and environmental impacts associated with pesticide use. So what are priority pesticides? They are a subset of high-risk pesticides. And I'll just note that there was a lot of discussion as part of the work group process on how we define priority pesticides and what they are. And this reflects a lot of difficult conversations, but I just wanted to note that I think we landed in a very good place and am excited to be able to move forward in this direction. High-risk pesticides are active ingredients or uses that are highly hazardous and or are likely to impact human health or the environment. And so how do we get to this category of priority pesticides from that broader category of high-risk pesticides? The criteria that the work group identified are looking at both hazard and risk classifications, the availability of alternatives, as well as keeping in mind high-risk pest management situations that may require the use of certain pesticides. I want to pause too here by noting that the evaluation of pesticides for these types of risks is part of the ongoing work of the Department of Pesticide Regulation. What this priority pesticide process is really getting at is taking a more comprehensive view and approach of identifying that subset of priority pesticides and moving forward for their elimination, but in the context of the availability of alternatives and potential high-risk pest management situations. And so we'll get to that identification through a process whereby DPR identifies potential priority pesticides and is advised by a multi-stakeholder Sustainable Pest Management Priority Advisory Committee. So just a quick orientation to the roadmap that I'll be running through. And I wanted to just start on a note on the work group process and consensus. So the work group and the urban subgroup worked together to identify and address a wide range of interests and perspectives. And while the work group members agreed on the North Star, they at times had opposing views about how best to reach it. In the end, they developed and agreed on the roadmap that all members are willing to live with and work with. That doesn't mean, though, that all work group members necessarily value all of the recommended goals and actions equally, but that they all agree as a whole that the roadmap works. So we'll start with keystone actions that are urgent and foundationally critical actions. And also just a note that they can't be looked at individually. They really are intended to be viewed as a whole and are interconnected. And then the leverage points that are part of them are really where sustained and focused effort is needed to be able to assure that we can reach these sustainable pest management goals. I'll just note here as well, we developed these as part of a process of looking at where the roadblocks were to the wider adoption of integrated pest management over the last decades and identified these actions as key places that need attention to be able to assure that we can move ahead at a system-wide level. We'll also talk about goals in the roadmap for advancing sustainable pest management in agricultural contexts, and then as well, some goals that are look at both urban and agricultural contexts. So, keystone actions. The first action is prioritizing prevention. And this really reflects the framework of if we don't have pests in the first place, we don't have to use pesticides. So this is really a critical action that applies both in urban and agricultural contexts. Next keystone action is coordinated state level leadership. And this is really ensuring that across the state, all agencies that have a hand in either policies that impact pest management or actually practice pest management are working in sync. Next keystone action is investing in building sustainable pest management knowledge in agricultural and urban pest management. Another key action is improving California's pesticide registration and evaluation processes and bringing more alternative products to market. And the last keystone action is enhancing monitoring and data collection. So I'll start with focusing on some goals and priority actions that apply both in the agricultural and urban space. And I'll start with prevention, exclusion, and mitigation systems. So in thinking about how we prioritize prevention, we really have to look at several different levels. One at the state level, another at the regional level, and then finally at the farm level. The 2030 goals that the roadmap identifies for the state are coordinating across different levels of government to strengthen biosecurity measures. At the regional level, we want to establish strong regional collaboration to prevent, detect, exclude, and mitigate pests at a landscape scale. And at the farm level, we want all growers to understand their role in detecting and reporting invasive pests. A priority action for this goal is securing dedicated, ongoing funding for the Department of Food and Agriculture for necessary expertise, infrastructure, and capabilities to interpret, detect, eradicate, and mitigate potential and actual invasive pests, including funding for the high-risk pest exclusion program. The next area is improving California's pesticide registration and continuous evaluation. And so here we have two key 2025 goals. The first is focusing on new product registrations. And the work here is to prioritize and expedite lower risk alternative products with clear and transparent scientific review and decision-making processes. And I'll just note here, this goes to the critical need to have alternatives so that we can move away from priority pesticides. The second key 2025 goal addresses existing products, and that is to evaluate currently registered pesticides, prioritizing those with the greatest risks to people and the environment, including risks that are acute toxicants, carcinogens, endocrine disruptors, and developmental and reproductive toxicants, as well as impacts to water, air, flora, and fauna. Priority actions include creating mechanisms to expedite the review of softer chemistries and biologicals while streamlining and improving the overall registration process, as well as promoting the development of alternatives to high-risk pesticides. Next key action is strengthening coordinated sustainable pest management leadership. And this is an area where we need early action to really implement the roadmap. And so we've got two 2024 goals that focus on that early action. One is having relevant state agencies and departments have the funding, staffing, and mission to advance the goals of sustainable pest management. And second, to have strong, coordinated, collaborative, multi-stakeholder bodies at the state and regional levels to advance sustainable pest management in agricultural and urban contexts. A priority action is to embed sustainable pest management across state agencies to enhance our ability at the Department of Pesticide Regulation to champion sustainable pest management and to enhance environment and health monitoring to track outcomes and roadmap goals. So next I'll move to focusing on key actions that focus on the agricultural space. And the first is enhancing knowledge, research, and technical assistance. The focus here is on providing equal and adequate access to the support and resources necessary to effectively implement sustainable pest management. A couple of key goals. One is expanding research and development infrastructure. So by 2030, we want to revitalize and expand public and private institutional infrastructure, workforce, and processes that fund and support sustainable pest management research and technology development. We also want to prioritize the research community's focus on viable sustainable pest management options and structure sustainable pest management research in a way that engages and integrates farmer, farm worker, and other stakeholder expertise and needs from traditional and indigenous knowledge sources and supports multi-directional learning. It's also really important that we enhance extension and education. So by 2030, all California farms have access to free or affordable, relevant, sustainable pest management education, training, and independent technical advice. And by 2040, all growing regions have trusted knowledge-based networks. Priority actions include reinvesting in and expanding sustainable pest management research and outreach to reflect the diversity of California agriculture and to increase the number of sustainable pest management trained technical advisors per farmer. Expanding research and demonstration and outreach grant making, launching a public-private sustainable pest management foundation to scale and coordinate investment in sustainable pest management, and funding and encouraging on-farm demonstration projects to show growers the value of sustainable pest management. We also want to align pest control advisors with sustainable pest management. The focus here is on the importance of training for sustainable pest management and for conducting coursework requirements for PCAs. So for goals by 2030, all pest control advisors have received sustainable pest management training and are incentivized to promote it in the field, and that pest control advisor advice is guided by sustainable pest management principles and practices, and their recommendations are not commission driven. Priority actions include requiring all pest control advisors to become trained in sustainable pest management and creating a new sustainable pest management licensing category for agricultural PCAs and applicators, and to require the sustainable pest management category to qualify for a PCA license. We also want to reduce the economic risk for growers transitioning to sustainable pest management. The focus here is on alternatives and incentives. So by 2030, all growers should have effective and feasible alternatives. And where those alternatives are not available, that we have research and funding infrastructure in place to develop those alternatives. Also by 2030, we want to have an integrated system of incentives and financial risk management that drives widespread adoption of sustainable pest management. And by 2030, that sustainable pest management has been adopted as the de facto pest management system for state agencies and state managed land. Priority actions include designing, funding, and launching a sustainable pest management transition initiative to incentivize and provide sufficient risk management to support growers to adopt sustainable pest management, and to identify opportunities to implement sustainable pest management on lands owned or leased by the state of California. We also want to be able to activate markets to drive sustainable pest management. Key goals here are establishing purchasing criteria by 2025 for identifying and validating sustainably pest management grown agricultural products. By 2030, to increase by 50% state institutional purchases of agricultural products grown in California in accordance with sustainable pest management criteria. And by 2030, expanding the presence in national retailers of a diversity of affordable California sustainably pest management grown agricultural products. Priority actions include establishing a sustainable pest management purchasing criteria task force by 2024 and establishing interim purchasing criteria by 2024. And now I would like to share some perspectives from the Sustainable Pest Management Work Group. And we'll begin with Lisa Herbert, the Sutter County Agricultural Commissioner. So take it away, Lisa.
Hi, thank you. Can everybody hear me? I'm hoping so. Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Herbert, the Sutter County Agricultural Commissioner. I'd like to thank Secretary Garcia and Secretary Ross for the opportunity to sit on the work group. I'd like to thank Director Henderson and Chief Deputy Director Karen Morrison as well. I appreciate our partnership. The roadmap was a long, hard, yet enlightening and rewarding process. I met great people and learned new perspectives while focusing on the North Star vision. But we can't ignore some important California facts about agriculture. California is ranked #1 in US cash receipts at about 51 billion. California agricultural exports totaled approximately 21 billion. California farmers produce 50% of the nation's fruit, nuts, vegetables, 20% of the milk, and more than 400 different agricultural commodities. As noted in California's 2023 Farm Bill recommendations, California's vast trade networks and distinct climate make it an ideal location for goods entering and leaving the country. However, more movement creates a greater threat from the introduction of invasive species and diseases. From 1990 to 2010, the annual rate of detection of new invertebrate species in California increased on average by 10 species a year. It is estimated that invasive species cost California more than $6 billion per year. California produces nearly 50% of the produce consumed nationally and is more than an idle threat. Investing in pest prevention as well as animal and plant health programs is an investment in the resilience of the U.S. food system and our national security. Some very important agricultural commissioner programs include pest detection, pest exclusion, pest management, pesticide use enforcement, phytosanitary export certification, and many other valuable programs to protect agriculture, people, and the environment. Approximately $131 million was expended by California counties implementing comprehensive programs for pest detection, pest management, and pest exclusion in California. County general funds accounted for over 49% of that funding. Without adequate mandated state funding, pest prevention activities are likely to fail, disrupting agricultural trade and increasing the dependency on pesticides. Agricultural commissioners fully support prioritizing and implementing the following keystone actions, which have been noted as urgent and foundationally critical to the success towards safer, more sustainable pest management. The keystone action is one of the least controversial areas of strong consensus and that I am very passionate about: prioritizing pest prevention. Ag commissioners urge the following priority actions to happen immediately: fully fund the high-risk pest exclusion program, expedite completion of the comprehensive pest prevention program analysis update and fund its implementation and periodic reviews, finalize the CalTrap initiative, which is working to transition detection and mapping to a digital platform. Finally, as noted in the Farm Bill recommendations, preventing and excluding pests reduces the need to use pesticides to control pest pressures and supports sustainable pest management. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for that great perspective. And again, thank you so much for your dedicated time on the work group. And next, I'd like to turn it over to Margaret Reeves from the Pesticide Action Network.
Thank you, Julie. Good morning, everybody. I am senior scientist at Pesticide Action Network based in Berkeley, calling in from Oakland. And first, I wanted to appreciate Director Julie Henderson for her commitment to this process and her direct personal engagement throughout the entire process. And thank the other work group members and the facilitators of what was a very challenging and yet successful process. Although the group necessarily kicked the can down the road with respect to which pesticides are priorities for elimination, we did get into the roadmap the term highly hazardous, as Julie mentioned, as a criterion for the priority pesticide determination. This is significant because the US regulatory system, unlike the EU, is based on risk assessment rather than hazard. In the hazard-based system, the innate properties of the chemical, whether it's a highly acutely toxic toxin or carcinogen, endocrine disruptor, developmental or reproductive toxicant, or highly hazardous to pollinators, is in there. And in the EU system, it flags it for regulatory action. Given the lived reality of farm workers and agricultural community members experiencing both acute and chronic pesticide-related health effects, this is critically important. And I again thank you, Julie, for highlighting that. The determination of which are the priority pesticides will be decided by a yet-to-be-identified advisory group. The constitution of and facilitation of the group will be vitally important. Community participation, much like those who participated in the work group, will be vital from the very beginning of the process. The group rightly focused on science-based decision-making, and as a scientist, I can't argue with that, and stressed that science is not only reductionist experimentation, but includes, as is in the roadmap, and Julie identified this as well, empiricism, observation, and historical, traditional, indigenous, place-based knowledge, all vital ways to understand how agricultural systems work and how best to manage them. I was also very pleased with the written shared understanding of the importance of SPM, or Sustainable Pest Management, as an ecosystem-based process with pest prevention at its core. However, people do have very different ideas about what this means. It was a bit challenging to incorporate language that prevention includes, but is not limited to the detection and exclusion of invasive pests. Rather, in agriculture, it also means ecosystem management to eliminate the pest-conducive conditions through cultural and biological manipulations, like diverse cropping systems, intercropping, rotations, building healthy, disease-suppressive soils, supporting natural enemy populations, etc. That's in there, but it seems to have been a bit demoted in presence. One very positive outcome was the unanimous agreement that pest control advisors and other technical assistance providers must be adequately trained in soil management, organic management, and those skills would be necessary for ecosystem-based approaches to pest management. Finally, and John will speak a little bit more about this, is the importance of state procurement as an engine of change, especially here in the fourth largest economy of the world. The recognition of organic as the best known and widely used certification system with enforcement mechanisms that's been growing continuously in California and around the world. Organic demonstrates in real time reduction in synthetic pesticide use and hence compliance with the primary goal of sustainable pest management. Organic should be front and center for procurement. It didn't receive the level of support we'd hoped to see in the roadmap, so we'll certainly be pushing for that. And with that, again, I thank Julie and the team and pass the baton to, well, I guess back to Julie and then to John. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Margaret. Really appreciate your perspective and also your dedicated time and commitment to the work of the roadmap. And we'll now turn it over to John McKean at Terrell Farms. Thanks, John.
Thanks, everyone. Good morning, all. Yeah, I've just got to convey again my thanks to be included in this SPM work group, in particular to the DPR, to DPR, CDFA, and Cal EPA, and Ag Innovations for really bringing together this very diverse set of actors. And then I know we've spoken about this a little bit so far in this webinar, but I think in my notes, that was one of the things that impressed me the most, was the ability for previous experience in chlorpyrifos to bring together this group of people with very diverse opinions and perspectives and parts of agriculture and urban coming together to have this discussion. So I really appreciate that. And with that, obviously, as also has been mentioned, is that, you know, when you have a diverse set of folks, you realize the challenges that you may have in getting to the end goal of the roadmap. And really that consensus getting was tough, and seeing others' perspectives was actually one of the benefits for me in this process. My name, I forgot to introduce myself. I do manage organic certification for Taylor Farms in the field and our processing facilities, as well as I deal with regenerative agriculture, field food safety, and a lot of social accountability. So, you know, when you have all those perspectives and reasons and kind of things that you're bringing to the table, it does bring difficulty and or a unique perspective for others to be able to see and be able to understand the complexity of the California agriculture and urban pest management systems, for sure. With that being said, our group also served as a framework for a current system to get the resources developed in California. That was very impressive, I think, for all of us to be asked to participate in the roadmap and think about where the future of California and pest management is going. In terms of the value of the items that I in particularly worked on, I think it's critically important to note the investment of building SPM knowledge, the registration process being expedited, and thinking through that process from the field level and a grower perspective. That's definitely some of the things we talk about there in the field, which is the availability of good materials, the availability of alternatives, and the pathway to getting those approved within the state of California and more broadly nationally. And within that, developing the working group for establishing the priority pesticides is fantastic. I think all of that work ties back to what Lisa was talking about, which is kind of the goal, one of the key pillars for us, which is prevention and eradication, prevention, detection, and eradication. That ties right into kind of the second thing that I was focusing on quite a bit and happy to see in the roadmap, which is enhancing knowledge and research and technical assistance. I've noted a lot that I've noted that the California system and program is very well developed and very robust. It's impressive. I think it leads the country. But what I noticed is that there are gaps in how we get all of these resources and all of these agencies and entities to communicate it out to the field level, to the folks that really can use the information and apply it into their operations. And so I was very happy to see us take focus on that, in particular with getting the right people in the job and also starting to focus on reinvigorating the ag extension program and the works with to train PCAs to get them essentially sustainable pest management working training within the PCA and CCA licensing program. I think that'll be critical to essentially conveying the alternatives out that are available throughout agriculture. And I know this will dip into urban agriculture as well. The last part for me in terms of what I was working on with SPM was activating markets. And that was really something that Margaret brought up at the end of her comments there, which is focusing on leveraging our California institutions to start being the examples to push forward healthy food and healthy health of our communities. by leveraging SPM products into our institutions within California. And we did quite a bit of work on lining out potentially what that would look like. I think it's important to note here that the industry itself, and I'm talking really about fresh produce, but I think it expands out to broader ag. We're in this moment where we're seeing a glut of additional certification requests for sustainability and environmentally good solutions for our retailers, our end customers, et cetera. And so within that, the group really started to discuss the girth of standards that are out there and available to essentially validate what SPM practices could be. And in so doing, we didn't necessarily want to create another standard and create another certification and create more audit fatigue and maybe even more confusion in the marketplace about these definitions about sustainable and regenerative versus organic, which has been present and in the marketplace for a long time. So really glad to see us essentially working towards recognizing a set of standards that already exist that align with SPM guidance and tenets, and that hopefully our institutions will be able to work in with essentially creating this committee to work in to find out essentially what we want, and then maybe what certifications out there are already available and already being completed by agriculture operations, urban operations that will fulfill that need, which would be great. That being said, the movement on urban agriculture is fantastic. I think holistically, I'm a very organically input-minded person, and I've always been curious about the level of application that happens in the urban setting. I know growing up with my dad, who was essentially a more is better kind of solution, I'm very glad that we're starting to turn towards tracking the data and the consumption in our urban space. And with that, I'll say what Taylor Farms can do to bring this into fruition is what we're doing currently. 2/3 of our operation is certified organic. And what we do on a regular basis now is try and push the envelope out in our agricultural fields and in our processing facilities to reduce the level of inputs and applications that we're doing through irrigation testing, through reduction in fertilizer trials, and other things as well. So that's where Taylor Farms will be pushing the agenda for this roadmap going forward, and I hope to continue to work on activating markets too. Thanks.
John, thanks so much for your perspective. Really appreciate it, and for your commitment to the work group and as we move forward on implementation. And now I would like to turn it over to Pam Marone with the Invasive Species Control Corporation. Take it away, Pam.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you everyone for having me on this work group. We all did work hard together over 2 years to come to this consensus document. And I think my fellow work group members have really summarized it well, so I don't need to belabor it. But I am excited about a systems-based approach to sustainable pest management that creates a resilient on-farm system that focuses on pest prevention, so you don't have to use as many pesticides. I'm excited about the developing curriculum for new PCA training that is focused on not just pesticides, but soil health, beneficials, cultural practices, and other things that Margaret and others mentioned. And beefing up extension, those who advise farmers, and having them be trained and ensure that they have the SPM knowledge. And ensuring all of this is done with the grower's economic viability in mind, since we do have a very big agricultural business in California. And I'm very excited, after spending decades in developing biological products, that there's a commitment from DPR to accelerate alternatives. But it's not just about accelerating alternatives, because the grower surveys that I see over and over again, I was just at the Biosolutions Conference in Reno, and again, the half of all growers really don't have a clue how to incorporate these new alternative tools or how to develop a systems-based program. So it's about accelerating alternatives, but then that training and knowledge transfer to get sustainable pest management and sustainable pest management in this roadmap implemented. So once again, I'm just thank you all for having me on this work group, and I'm excited to see this unfold in the future.
Thanks very much, Pam, and thanks so much for your commitment to the work group. Really appreciate it. And now just want to quickly say a word about next steps. Key to the roadmap was identifying the goal by 2025 for the state to develop a plan and funding mechanisms and programs to prioritize pesticides for reduction and to support the practice change necessary to transition away from the use of high-risk pesticides in agricultural and non-agricultural settings. I want to just note that no one recommendation in the roadmap will on its own bring about the systemic change that we're looking for, and that to meet the 2050 goals, the full breadth of the roadmap has to be implemented. The roadmap recommendations can really only be effectively implemented if the entire system is working together to create the conditions necessary for these outcomes to be realized. And most importantly, that this really be an all of California approach. And so looking forward to partnership with everyone here and beyond. So a couple of quick notes, just a reminder on resources. The roadmap is available on the DPR website, that's noted here. And as Karen mentioned, we have a public comment period open through 5 p.m. on March 13th, and comments can be sent to alternatives@cdpr.ca.gov. And just a reminder that we do have one additional webinar this evening focused on SPM in agricultural settings, and that is at 5:30. And now we have a few minutes for some questions, so I will turn it over to Leah.
Thanks, Julie. I'll ask the first question. So there have been a couple questions that have come in about the representation of PCAs and others on the work group. Can you speak to the selection process for work group members and next steps?
Sure, thanks, Leah, and appreciate the question. I'll just say at the highest level, and we partnered with CDFA in really trying to assemble a group that represented the broad range of stakeholders with an interest in pest management, both in the agricultural and urban settings, and identified people who represent those interests who are really focused on a shared goal and who would work together collaboratively. And so we then, I'll just mention the range of folks we had from on the agricultural side, representation from both conventional and organic farming, and from a whole range of perspectives within those spaces, pest management practitioners, pesticide registrants, our county ag commissioner, Lisa Herbert. We had community and farm worker representatives, tribal representatives, public health representatives, and then also UC researchers and from the UC IPM program. So a really broad range of stakeholder representation. That said, this is an enormous state, and agriculture is an enormous industry in the state. And so while we did our best to have representation, part of what we're looking at for this next step for implementation is to really capture input from across the many very diverse interests in the state through this public commentary period, as well as we move forward in the coming decades, and really looking for the partnerships for all stakeholders.
Thanks, Julie. And I did want to answer out loud one of the questions that came in from the Q&A. We will have a recording of all both the urban webinar and the agriculture focused webinar on DPR's website later this week or early next week. We won't have the slides, but a recording will be available of all webinars. Okay, next question. How will the recommendations in the Sustainable Pest Management Roadmap be funded?
Very good question. And so right now we are focusing on gathering input through this public comment period on implementation. to help us prioritize actions that really are foundational and need to be taken in the short term, and those that need to be taken in the longer term. And so those will inform our advocacy for funding in the legislature. We also are looking at funding that we have at the department, as well as other agencies that we can take advantage of. At the Department of Pesticide Regulation, we have integrated pest management grants that fund both research as well as outreach and education. So we'll be looking to ensure those are advancing these goals, and really just looking for opportunities for partnership to help with implementation that can be taken without additional funding.
Thanks, Julie. And I wanted to go back to priority pesticides. There's been a couple questions about that. Are there a list or examples of priority pesticides you can share? How is that process and discussion going to move forward? And what is DPR doing about some of these pesticides currently?
Thanks, Leah. So maybe I'll just start with the last question about what the department is doing currently. As part of our ongoing work, we evaluate risks both to people, farm workers, and the environment as part of our regular regulatory program prior to the registration of pesticides, as well as after they're registered. So that work continues. As part of that work, we have an awareness of pesticides that do pose the greater areas of risk both to people and the environment. But what we're looking to do with this establishment of the group of priority pesticides is to look really comprehensively at that group of high-risk pesticides and identify those that present the greatest risk. And that's with the advice of this committee that we are going to be setting up. So bringing in outside perspectives, and we'll also have public comment be a part of that process.
Thanks, Julie. I think we have time for one more question. So 2050 is a long way out. What are some of the priorities or interim goals that we are discussing or setting in the meantime? And how are we thinking about measuring success and communicating that out to the public as well?
Great, thanks. So just a quick note again on the 2050 target. I think, as I mentioned at the top, that really reflects the recognition that there's a lot of work and a lot of collaboration and a lot of investment that's needed to make this system-wide transition. However, we absolutely recognize that we, number one, have to get started now and really continue building on the Integrated Pest Management Foundation. But the work group did identify numerous goals within the roadmap that are nearer term. So for example, on the prevention side, we've got the 2030 goals that are looking to establish the state, regional, and farm level priority actions, including funding the CDFA high-risk pest exclusion program. On the registration and evaluation action by 2025, we at the Department of Pesticide Regulation have targets to improve both our registration and our evaluation process, including that focus on priority pesticides. For the agency collaboration, we've got a goal of 2024 to have that state agency level coordination, as well as looking to coordinate at the local level. For research and outreach, there are 2030 goals to expand infrastructure, workforce processes that fund sustainable pest management research and ensure that farms have access to free and affordable sustainable pest management training and education. And also by 2030, for the PCA alignment to provide that sustainable pest management training and to promote sustainable pest management in the field. And then on alternatives, we've got the 2030 goal that will have all growers have effective alternatives, and where there are not alternatives, to ensure that we have research funding in place to develop those alternatives. And finally, on the activating markets by 2025, establishing purchasing criteria to identify validating SPM grown agricultural produce. So really, I guess in summary, a lot of nearer term goals that really support us in getting to that those two 2050 goals.
Thanks, Julie. And I want to know all of those goals and dates are in the roadmap, which is on our website if people would like to see a recap of that. I want to acknowledge that we did not get to all of the questions. There were a lot of great questions that came in, and this is just the start of conversations and opportunities for engagement on the roadmap as we move forward. So we'll hope to get to more questions in the future on this topic. But I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. We're at our time, so I'm going to close the webinar, but thank you. And recording will be available on our website where the roadmap is also available.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.